Hi, guys. Welcome to the show today. We've got an incredible guest for you, the great Dinesh D'Souza. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dinesh.
It's my pleasure. Great to be on the show with you guys.
So first, I want to plug your movie. I want people to go to trumpcardthemovie.com. If you have not already, save that link. It's very important. We'll plug it again at the end of the show, but the movie's incredible, and we do want to touch on that. In fact, quite a few of our questions today have to do with the movie because you just made this movie, but it's so prescient in the moment right now. What we're seeing with big tech is where I wanted to go first. How do you think the censorship we're seeing from big tech relates to the Democrats' plan, many elected Democrats' plan to change America into a socialist nation?
This all seems to me both tragic and ironic because when these platforms first were developed, we were all so excited because we thought, wow, technological capitalism is delivering new ways for people to communicate. This will give wider forums. It'll empower ordinary people to be part of this robust debate. And so how sad and ridiculous that these very platforms have now become an extension of Big Brother. Big Brother here referring to Orwell's nightmare scenario of a centralized state. Interestingly, Orwell was very prophetic. He spoke about the outer party and the inner party. The inner party are the people in government. The deep state would be part of that. But the outer party is the media, people outside government who are doing the bidding of the socialist state. And much of what we call the media, and I would include some of the digital platforms, are like that. They're not a real media. They're not giving you information. They're not fairly covering all sides. They are selectively processing information, rewriting history. They're a propaganda wing of the political left. And the more we recognize that, the less credibility and power we will assign to them.
Don't you think, an argument I've been trying to make isn't what they're doing an in-kind donation, like way beyond the limits in a way that we haven't really seen before in politics? Because what I'm seeing from them, and let's say how they throttled the New York Post story, which is unprecedented, that in itself is helping the Biden campaign, to a degree that is just, it's unthinkable. I don't think you could add up the amount of money that's actually giving to the Biden campaign. What do you think about that?
Well, this is a case where, if we had a government that was applying the laws fairly, and think of how odd this is. We control the presidency, the executive branch. Trump has named the attorney general. Why the FBI hasn't raided the offices of Facebook and Twitter, demanded, why the Senate and even the Republicans in Congress haven't demanded the names and identification of all accounts that have been censored in any way, everybody's reach that has been suppressed. We should be on this. And part of it, I think, is that there is a sort of sick a kind of twisted libertarianism that basically says these are private companies, so let's let them do whatever they want. Well, if they're truly private companies, they don't deserve any government protection from liability either. And so then they should be liable to being sued for anything that appears on their platforms.
Yep. And, I bring this up to people, shareholders right now. I know shareholders in Twitter that are upset about what they're doing because it's very clear that you're having less impressions when you're throttling people's ability to retweet content, and therefore less opportunities to service ads to those people. So that's another thing on top of it. If they're a private company, they've gone public, their shares are out there, you can buy their shares. Their shareholders should have an expectation that they're going to try to increase profits as a company. If we're going with a strictly just 100% capitalist mindset, but even on top of that, people need to be cognizant of the fact that what happened with phones, imagine our press secretary had AT&T get into her phone call and say, hey, we're cutting this call off. You're not allowed to talk about that. And we're also taking away your phone calling privileges for 2 days. People would think that was insane. So why do you think it is people don't see how similar that is to social media and its use now?
It's exactly the same. See, in reality, these digital platforms pretend to be like AT&T, whereas in fact, they're more like the Atlantic Monthly or the New York Times. They're publishers and they edit their content and they're blatant about it. They have an editorial point of view. And it's clear that if you look at the way that their censorship falls, it doesn't fall randomly. It's not like the tennis ball, which can go on this side of the net or that side of the net. It always falls on the same side of the net. And that suggests that there is a pattern here. So I say bring out the RICO statutes, raid their offices, This is an issue of basic civil liberties, and ultimately, remember, all regulation is in the interest of the consumer. So we're the consumers. We're the ones being shafted here by these companies, and we shouldn't let some kind of blind allegiance to big corporate America stop us from recognizing that these people have become accessories of tyranny.
Absolutely. And one way that they manipulate people is manipulating the mindsets and the attitudes, shifting the culture. And these are things that are a little harder to pinpoint and talk about, but I think you did an amazing job illustrating in your artful movie. So I want to talk about the idea that capitalism is a true form of social justice, because that is quite a statement when we have a generation of students that are graduating out of college with this idea that capitalism is this oppressive
enemy.
The enemy of the people, essentially, and is the antithesis of that statement. So could you break that down for us, and also tell us how we are going to break this cultural paradigm?
Yeah, so this is, I think, part of what our movies do that is pretty unique, because capitalism has won the moral, it has won the economic battle, but it has never won the moral fight. This is something I think that some libertarians don't understand. They keep telling you about how efficient capitalism is, and the left kind of admits that. Their point is that it may be efficient, but it's evil. It's motivated by greed and selfishness. It's undemocratic. It's selfish. And so you have to fight on that ground. You have to win on the ground of social justice itself. And so I take the proudest boast of democratic socialism, namely, it's democratic. Hey, it has popular consent. The people are voting for it every 2 or every 4 years. And I go, yeah, okay. Let's compare that with how often people vote in the market. Well, frankly, they vote all the time, constantly. The market is direct democracy. You don't even have to elect some representative to go vote for you. You can vote with your hard-earned dollars. And so we developed this idea that capitalism is far more responsive to popular consent than socialism. Now, it's one thing if I put this argument in a book. It's a good thing I can support it with references, have quotes from Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments and his but this is not the same as showing it in a movie. A movie has a kind of emotional power to deliver the point. And I think it's a kind of messaging that books can't do. It's also, by the way, a messaging that Trump doesn't do. Trump will say, I'm going to protect capitalism. But Trump is not a big giver of reasons why capitalism is fair. Trump kind of assumes that you know and you agree, and that you will sort of go, yeah, right. You'll affirm what he's saying, but I think that there's a deep need for narrative and for explanations, particularly, as you say, for the younger generation. So we try very hard in our movies to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you talked about identity socialism in the film. Can you explain that concept to viewers? I think that's the first time a lot of people have heard of that term.
Yeah, identity socialism refers to the kind of weird marriage between classic socialism and identity politics. So socialism typically is about the rich and the poor. It's about a class divide. That's how Marx described it. Marx thought that economics is the key to understanding how society is divided. But interestingly, notice that when Joe Biden was nominating a running mate, he didn't say, I'm going to find a person who's extremely poor and put them on my ticket. No, he said, I'm going to give it to a woman. I'm going to give it ideally to a woman of color. So what is Biden doing? He's playing the race card. He's playing the gender card. So socialism today morphs the rich and the poor, that divide, and adds the divide based on race, black against white, based on gender, male against female, straight against gay, even legal against illegal. So this is a new, an even more divisive form of socialism than Marx. And its goal is to create a majority coalition of oppressed victims.
Yeah, your film does an incredible job of outlining this in greater depth. So I urge people to watch it. But one of the things that I thought was interesting from it is that you talk about, how there is going to be an intersection at some point of some of these groups, that are ideologically opposed, but for now are allied among each other, like, say, radical Islam and the LGBTQ community. So where do you see that going in the future? Because their association, while parallel now, is untenable. Eventually, there's going to be a crash. So how does that crash and where does it end up? Who does the left end up stomping out from their sort of idea of unicorn intersectionality where everybody's just in kumbaya?
So a good way to think about this is, well, first of all, I think one of the unique aspects of the film is it exposes a radical Islamic intervention, collusion with the left. And we hardly hear a word about this. We hear all about the Russia collusion. And, the Russia collusion is, 3 Russians spending $20,000 on Facebook ads. But we're talking about tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. And this is not Muslims organizing in America. This is countries like Iran working through intermediaries like Qatar and funneling money to think tanks, even conservative think tanks, and media figures. And political figures like Ilhan Omar. So this, I think, it shows a dimension that people should be aware of. Very important. Now, admittedly, the left is permissive. It's sexually perverted. It's pro-gay, transsexual, the whole deal. And the radical Muslims are not. They're on the opposite end of that fence. So the question then becomes, wow, how did these two strange bedfellows get together and work on the same side? And part of it is they have a common enemy. And part of it also is that they protect each other, so that the radical Muslims supply votes by stirring up through the imams, the Islamic community, particularly in places like Michigan or Minnesota, where Ilhan Omar's district is. And in return, the left gives them protection. The left basically goes around accusing anybody who criticizes radical Islam of being an Islamophobe. So the Muslims can't do that. They need kind of useful idiots to do that work for them. And their argument is that once we have the revolution and we've gotten rid of all the Trump people and all the conservatives, and once we've squelched the Christians, then we can fight it out. But that day is coming far down the road. Frankly, I don't know who's going to win. The liberals are certainly more powerful in academia and the media and Hollywood and so on, but they cannot match the radical Muslims in determination or ruthlessness. So it comes down ultimately to whether it's going to be liberal cultural power against Islamic fanaticism. And man, that would be, that's like the Iran-Iraq war. I'm really not sure which side to be on.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think the allegiance is more towards that extremism. That seems to be what they gravitate towards. So I could see them absolutely rolling over on their values, because their values are already so inconsistent with what they claim to support. I mean, you look at intersectional feminism, and how does that really jive with some countries that are predominantly Islamic, who still throw gays off of buildings and who still stone women to death.
Child marriage.
In child marriage, right? So I was really just enlightened to hear Imam Tawhidi talk about this so transparently in your film. And we had him on our show, and he's really a wealth of knowledge when it comes to Islam and in our country, what's happening. Media has covered this up. Why do you think this is that, Imam himself claims that the people that are living in Elon's district are more extreme than some of these radical jihadis living in the Middle East. So why are they covering this up?
They're covering it up because to them, to think of it this way, there's a phrase inside of Islam and radical Islam. It's the distinction between what can be called the near enemy and the far enemy. So if you're a Muslim, let's say living in the Middle East, the near enemy would be Israel, and the far enemy would be the United States. And you can have a tactical debate. Should we fight the near enemy or should we fight the far enemy? Which is more dangerous? Where should we expend our resources? Now, from the left's point of view, the near enemy is Trump. And the far enemy might be some Islamic regime that's throwing gays off a building. But to them, to the left, the near enemy is far more dangerous to their way of life than the far enemy. So they're perfectly willing to live with the far enemy as long as they can subvert the near. They're even willing to ally with the far enemy to defeat the near enemy. I think that's a good way to understand why the left seems so blind, in fact, morally tolerant of all this Islamic extremism abroad, is because they want to ally with it at home.
Right. I mean, and Ilhan Omar specifically, we've heard so many bombshells drop. And how is it that no media is interested in covering it? I mean, even right-wing media. It seems like nothing has.
Well, it's not even just that; it's the lack of justice, and that's what I'm.
No indictments are being brought forward. I mean, what is going on?
That's what
there?
I'm more concerned with. Is we have that. We talked about this actually earlier before the show. A fairness to a degree that is a fault, because we don't attack issues or potential corruption in the same way when it's a Democrat that we do when it's somebody who's not a prominent Democrat. And that's a problem. So why is it somebody like Ilhan Omar has escaped being raided by the FBI, having, the immigration case come forward, anything that she's done, or now this vote buying scheme? Why does she escape having any sort of culpability for what she does?
Yeah, so first a comment on this broader double standard, and it is just infuriating. I just read today on social media that the FCC has sent the Biden campaign a list of people who have exceeded the campaign finance law. This list is 240 pages long. So think about this. Think of all the Democratic donors who have done exactly what I did. I gave too much. I exceeded the campaign finance law. I was locked up for 8 months overnight for it. I had to go to psychiatric counseling. Cost me $500,000. So what I'm getting at is these guys are all going off scot-free. Hey, Biden campaign, these are people who have given too much. You might want to return the extra money. No questions about, not even any questions about interviewing them. No indictments, nothing. So obviously this really upsets your civics book idea of how justice is meted out in America. Now let's turn to Ilhan Omar. Her protections can be described as four. She has four walls of protection, and they all have to do with identity socialism. Number one, she is a woman. Number two, she is a Muslim and wears the hijab. Number three, she is a refugee. And number four, she is from the desert. She's a person of color from the desert. So she's like, she's got the bottom rung of the ladder. And this makes her politically untouchable. This is why the Democrats have no interest in going after her, nor the media. And it's why our side is scared of her. We're much more scared of her than we're scared of some other person, because she's got these sort of multiple layers of victim status. And even though we disavow identity politics, privately, we don't know how to fight it. By say we, I mean collectively. You do and I do. But by and large, our side is afraid to bring out the handcuffs. We think it's going to look bad to put some Muslim woman from the desert into handcuffs, even though that is what equal justice under the law urgently calls for.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great point. I mean, we're not going to have the America that we love unless that equal justice is meted out. And that means both sides. That's just what America requires to truly have the freedoms that we all value. I want to go back to a point you made that I thought, you said really quickly, and I just want to make sure people get it. You said that, we can't just bow down to these big corporations. And I think this is sort of a very confusing point for young people who maybe have this idea of what being Republican is from the Mitt Romney era or John McCain era, where the association with big business was very clear. And it was, the left's whole argument, the far left's whole argument is that we cozied up too much to big business. What do you think is responsible, aside from Trump, because Trump is part of it, but there's something else, there are other reasons. Why has the right and the Republican Party and our base turned more towards a populism that says, you know what, sometimes these big companies need to have someone looking over what's happening here because they may not be acting in the best interests of freedom and of America in general?
Well, I'll give you my own way of thinking about it. I mean, the way I look at it is simply almost in a sort of simple political way, that for 25 years, starting with 1980, starting with the Reagan Revolution, me and my colleagues in the conservative movement have been defending these big corporations and talking about how they are so much better than big government. And then I noticed that they turn around and knife us in the back by giving money to the left and funding all this Black Lives Matter and Antifa. And so through a combination of leftist commitment, which is the case with some companies like Nike, and then sheer cowardice, other companies that have no backbone at all, are terrified of being accused of being racist, would happily, write a check and leave the amount blank to avoid that accusation. These people are really not on our side. And so there's no reason for us to carry water for them. To hell with them. And not only that, but I know very good ways to bring them down. Now, we don't think like this. Our thinking is extremely tame. We think of things like this. If Disney does this, we are not going to go to Disneyland. I'm not going to shop at this store. They don't care about that. If you want, think of how Black Lives Matter works. They go in front of your office and they'll put racist signs until you come out and meet them and take their non-negotiable demands and meet all of them. That's when they go away. So we've got to start thinking in a little bit more of a militant way. And if we do, we can be extremely effective. Corporations do a lot of business through their websites. And the reviews of their products posted on their websites is absolutely critical to their global reputation. So if you want to take on a corporation, just have 10,000 people go on its website and review all its products negatively. If you just basically say their clothes suck, their barbecue grills don't work, everything sucks, you're cutting up your Costco card, you're going to do this. And I say this basically out of experience. Costco pulled my book in 2014. There was a consumer revolt. People were cutting up their Costco cards and posting photos of themselves cutting up their cards on Costco. Costco had an emergency meeting, flew me up to Seattle. I was sitting across from the CEO, was virtually crying in my presence. Why? Because he even said his job was on the line. Now, how can I single-handedly bring down $1 billion corporation? And the answer is the enormous consumer power as reflected on the Costco site. So don't go complain on the Breitbart site or the Daily Caller site. Go on the Costco site where all the Costco consumers are, and and you will see how quickly they will pay you first-class attention.
Absolutely. I think you couldn't have said that better. We need to sort of weed out the weakness, whether Trump wins or not. There's a weak element that still remains that needs to be weeded out, because we do need fighters. We need people who have the mindset you have and that we have, and they're willing to fight for these values. You ask in your film in multiple different ways that are overt and not so overt, what are you willing to do for freedom, and what are you willing to do for your values? And that's a question that I think a lot of us and our viewers have been asking themselves lately. And, for people like you and us, there's nothing that we won't do to fight for it. And I think that that's the mentality we have to have. And like you said, we have to recognize the way they're playing this game, and we can't play with kid gloves, because if we do, we're going to lose every single time. And so I really hope people get that point, and watch the film, because it really drives home how important that point is. I wanted to move on into sort of what is missing in the Biden story, because I think right now people are focused on Hunter. Hunter's not the only issue. What can you tell our viewers about the whole Biden family corruption? This goes further.
Hunter is not the issue at all. And in the movie, as you know, having seen it, we showcase not only Hunter but the two brothers, James Biden and Frank Biden. They're in the same boat as Hunter. First of all, it's important to realize that all these Biden family members, complete losers. None of them have any credentials. None of them have really done anything with their lives. They're all bums, but they're bums with the last name Biden. And Biden knows that the money comes through access to him. This is Joe Biden. He's the ringleader. He's the sort of mafia chieftain. He's in on it. That's the value of the New York Post emails. There are two bombshell emails that directly show, what's the share for the big guy? We got to leave 10% for the big guy. That's Joe Biden. Or, I got to give half my salary to Pop. Who's that? Joe Biden. So Joe Biden knows that he's the source. He's the one selling the influence. So naturally, he wants his share of the loot. And Hunter Biden's a little upset about it. But you can see Joe Biden's side of the story. Who's generating the revenue here? I am, not you, Hunter. You're just the bag man that comes along with the satchel and leaves with the satchel full of cash. So this shows the deep corruption of the left. And by the way, the Biden story is essentially a transposition of the Clinton story. The Clintons use the foundation. The Bidens use, because the foundation doesn't have the same disclosure requirements as the Clintons themselves. Similarly here, family members don't have the same disclosure requirements as Joe Biden does. That's why he funnels the money through them. These are racketeers, basically. They're like the Chavistas in Venezuela. They are not like the Scandinavians. People on the left goes, we want Scandinavian socialism. I don't know any Scandinavian politician in the entire region's history who has gone from 0 to 100 million euros on a government salary. No way. So this is a peculiarly banana republic type of corruption. The Chinese, by the way, have a long practice of enriching the family members of politicians in the Asia Pacific region that they want to do business with, they want favors from. And Joe Biden learned about this racket and wanted to get in on it. So we have a deeply corrupt guy. He was corrupt as vice president. It's a little scary to think of putting this mafia chieftain in the Oval Office.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I want to point out that the story's not over with Hunter. I mean, I think you know as well as I do, there's more stuff coming in the next few days on what they have there. And I think it's incredibly damning for the Biden campaign. They can't hide from it. Eventually, the media is going to have to cover this. I think and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're just so willing at this point to put it all on the line, partisanship wise, and just ignore this story through the election. But I don't see how they're going to do it with some of the stuff that, we have one of the journalists who's breaking this coming on Monday. And I don't see how the rest of the media can ignore the stories that are coming. So,
Well, it begs the point, how powerful is the media? It's as powerful as the people that are subservient to it. And you had a brilliant point. You said, what does it mean to reduce the power of media in our minds? And I wanted you to talk about that. And also in the context of what we were just talking about, is fighting back. What can we do besides investing in new ecosystems, which we speak a lot about on our show, of conservative entertainment, things like that. But specifically, is it true that if we as consumers just stopped consuming their media and their lives, that they would truly still hold power over us and over the societal figures like this?
Well, if we can find a way, their strategy relies on the simple fact that out of the 300 million Americans in this country, they can reach a very large number of those people, and we can reach only a much smaller fraction. So we have to change that balance of power. But the moment we can reach a larger fraction, I think we simply have to exit from their world. And by that, I mean, we don't need to refute what appears on CNN. We just don't watch it. We have no interest in it. We treat a CNN coverage like a Zoom meeting of the Democratic National Committee. Why would we want to refute what they say? It's idiocy. We don't care about it. Their facts aren't facts as far as we're concerned. This requires a different kind of psychology because we're so used to reacting. It's kind of like for years we spent time documenting media bias until Roger Ailes figured out, start a cable channel. If your premise is right, that half the country is not being served, a cable channel that serves those people should be very successful, as Fox is. And we should do the same in entertainment and the same in stand-up comedy and the same in education and the same in everything. So that's a long-term task that goes way beyond Trump because it affects every election. So yes, I think that we need to build alternative platforms. I'm already starting to build up actively on places like Parler and Rumble. I'm also trying to invest in those companies because I want to see them succeed. And I don't like the sword of Damocles hanging over my head at Twitter and Facebook. I don't like the power those guys have over me. So I'm going to try to play their game as much as I can. But I'm also very careful to make sure that I'm not reliant on them because it's too vulnerable to be at their mercy. They're not on our side.
Absolutely. And small businesses, people that rely on these Facebook, social media to sustain their income streams need to really be aware that this is something that can be taken from you and utterly destroy your business, and to smartly invest in new ways of sustaining your business and your livelihood and your future and every aspect of our lives. You talk about the importance of alternate forms of media, but you said something about the psychology of it. Shifting a mindset that has been addicted. This is culturally ingrained to consume media as a reflection of our reality. Because if we don't have somebody else telling us what is going on, we essentially don't know who we are or what our place is in the world. So it's really deeper than just, switching gears to a new form of media. It's about deconstructing this belief system that we need figures, puppets essentially, to tell us what is going on, and we can't rely on our own two eyes and our own life experiences. So what can you say, I'm really interested in that aspect of it, the psychology of it, of really saying no. I mean, it really is that easy of just turning off the TV and no longer allowing it this significant role in our lives.
Well, it's not easy because most of us have been raised with a certain set of sort of civics books ideas about not just the media, but institutions like the FBI. We think that these are neutral, that they apply the law. Look at academia. I went to Dartmouth. It was very important to be an Ivy League institution, and so you have this idea that the professors are these sort of Solomonic figures who are basically giving you, they may have a point of view, but they're by and large giving you the truth. And it's important to realize that when you start digging down, you realize that many of these people are habitual liars. I mean, you'll have a guy who's a well-known biographer of LBJ who knows for a fact that LBJ routinely used the N-word after he signed the Civil Rights Act. So think how damning that is for the whole liberal narrative that LBJ started out as a segregationist racist, but then he made this marvelous journey to enlightenment. It's all false, and they know it's false. But in a 500-page biography, they will leave out this crushing fact because they'll have, if they put it in, they'll have to explain it. And they have no explanation for it. In fact, it invalidates their whole storyline. So they will just leave it out. And so the sheer chutzpah, the audacious dishonesty of these people has now become very palpable to me. Even these Pulitzer Prizes mean nothing to me. Half of these people are complete frauds. So I think it's a little bit disillusioning to discover all this because it makes you sort of have to rebuild your thinking from the ground up. Right. It's like when I first came to Washington, D.C. in the 80s, I'd look around, I'd see all these statues. I'd be like, wow, look at this statesman, look at that statesman. Then I realized, wait a minute, most of these people are complete bums. The only reason they have statues is that they took taxpayer money and got appropriations to build a bridge or a school. It wasn't a single penny of their own money. And they've got their own stupid name on the school, even though the school, that all that represents is their political cunning in horse trading with their colleagues and getting this money allocated. So why is half of West Virginia named after Robert Byrd? The guy was a loathsome character. But there's a statue, Robert Byrd Highway, Robert Byrd School, Robert Byrd Medical Center. Once you know the real story, you don't see it quite the same way, do you?
Yeah, you're so right. And what you said about like the Pulitzer journalists, like it means nothing. We just had yesterday, Landon was watching DHS announce that they were doing the first center for human trafficking, that they were opening it. And there was press, a few, very little press, but there was some press there. And they ask at the end of this presentation, this great press conference with all this amazing news, they say, are there, any questions now? And crickets, not one question from the media because they don't want to tell the real story of good news. They just don't want to say, they don't want to share any good news. Everything needs to be negative. So they're there to see if anything negative comes up. Nothing negative came up, then nothing. So she posts it and it got, almost, I think at this point, 2 million views. It went viral really quickly. And Don Jr., Ivanka, Laura, they all shared it because it's just so damning of where the media is and what's in their heart. And what I find interesting is the very first response we got from media was Glenn Kessler at Washington Post, their fact checker, saying that he wanted her to prove the facts in a video that she did about all of the accomplishments of the Trump administration's record on trafficking. And it's all very easy stuff, like searching out the FOSTA-SESTA bill, searching out the FBI statistics. These are really easy things. This isn't some Q conspiracy. This is very, very, very simple stuff that's at all government, agencies have. They don't even know how to do their job. They tell you, you prove it or else we're going to do a hit piece, essentially. So it's a great point you made. I want to jump some. Go ahead.
Years ago, when I was at AEI and the Hoover Institution, I would hang out with people like Bill Kristol, and these are guys who, now they're never Trumpers and anti-Trumpers, but at that time they were all, pseudo sophisticates. Where you'd say, "Hey, Bill, the media is so left wing," and they'd be like, "Well, Dinesh, the media is sensationalist. The media really goes after the the story that gets everybody. They're after ratings. They're after, and now you realize, wait a minute, we're delivering you the most sensational story you can imagine. The Democratic candidate for the presidency is a head of an international crime operation stretching across 3 continents. He's enriching himself under the table, and there's smoking gun emails to prove it. And yet you have a virtual conspiracy of silence.
And there's a sex/drug scandal with his son, who's the bag man.
Exactly. So see how that blows out of the water all this pompous rhetoric about the fact that the media is really interested in sensationalism. No, they're not. This is a purely ideological operation. They see themselves in one camp and not the other. And in fact, we're wasting our time to keep pointing out their double standards. When we say things like, why are you covering the Trump tax return and you're not covering Biden's finances? This is a double standard. We're appealing to a higher standard of objectivity or fairness that none of these scumbags even share. So we're calling them to something, these higher ideals. They don't have any higher ideals. They're hitmen, and they see themselves that way.
I think that's something Tucker Carlson, I rarely ever say this, but it's something he's wrong about, because he says all the time that he thinks after this election there's going to be just a huge wipeout of our current media and a bunch of new faces and fresh. I don't think that's going to happen. I think these people, no matter what happens, they're hitmen, they're trusted hitmen, and all those people who are in power that make these decisions are going to keep them there. I do want to move on, though, and tell you thank you. I want to tell you thank you because in your film, you highlighted something Michael Moore did. My family's from Cuba. Michael Moore, in his film Sicko, I think it was 2007 or 2008, he basically went and he did propaganda for the Cuban government. He went to the one really great hospital. It's not even that great, but it's the one by their standards really great hospital in Cuba that all of the rich leaders within the Communist Party and tourists who can afford it go to. And you showed what the hospitals are really like in Cuba. And I just want to say, as somebody who, I still have family in Cuba, and one of my family members died because the Cuban government wouldn't give medical aid, wouldn't give the treatment necessary to treat her cancer. And when she went to the hospital, like you see in your film, dirty needles, they didn't have the medicine there. She's on a metal table. There's no cushions. This stuff's all 50 years old. It's disgusting. Blood still dried into the... I mean, it's just disgusting what is really there. And I just wanted to say thank you to you for exposing Michael Moore for being the hack and the propagandist that he is for a bunch of communists.
Well, and we tried to show that this was knowing complicity. This is not the case of the dummy Michael Moore syndrome, because, sometimes you think the fat guy is really stupid. He doesn't know what he's doing. He knows very well that this is a select hospital. He's deliberately colluding with the Cuban regime.
Absolutely.
That's right. And Hollywood in general, they support figures like this. They elevate figures like this.
100%.
People are starting to connect the dots that Hollywood, big tech, and the media are all supporting the same party with the same collective agenda. And I think people are waking up to it. And
you may not know this yet, but I saw numbers this morning that they just released their finance report, $66 million from Silicon Valley for Biden in the last 30 days, $66 million, okay? So these same companies who are now suppressing our voices, who are fighting at every turn to silence Republicans and conservatives in general, they're donating $66 million in just the last 30 days to Joe Biden. That's insane. I don't think people realize how much money that is in politics in 1 month period from one group of people. So I just want to point that out. But the last thing I wanted to get into is Hollywood, because I'm a director who's directed Oscar-winning actors, actresses, big music stars and stuff. You have tremendously successful films. We need to talk about how we change the future for our country in terms of entertainment, because my point of view, and I'm curious if you feel the same way, I see things like Pure Flix is they're great for the audience they serve, but they're very niche and they're not going to change anybody's mind. And I think what Hollywood does really well is you look at films like Dora the Explorer or like the new Scooby-Doo movie. And what you'll notice when you watch those is there's multiple references in those movies to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Key characters that are heroes in the movie dress up as her for Halloween. They refer to her as a hero of women's rights. So these, very subtle ideas get planted in kids' minds. And then they talk about the dangers of toxic masculinity. They talk about social justice. And these ideas, these words or buzzwords get stuck in a kid's head. So when they hear a politician in the future use those similar words that they've learned to trust through Hollywood, they identify with that politician. So how does the right, I've been having trouble myself, even as somebody who has a production company that has worked with all the big major film studios. I can't find anybody on the right that wants to fight this battle, because we need to fight this battle. We need to have those same subtle impressions to not just youth, but to everybody who consumes entertainment, because that's how we share our values. So what do you think that this future looks like? And do you agree with me about how important this is?
I agree completely with everything you just said. And I also agree that we need to make mainstream films, not niche films that are niche Christian movies or niche conservative movies. Debbie, my wife, and I were executive producers on the film Infidel that is in the theaters now. And it's competing very well with the Russell Crowe movie and with Tenet and with all the Halloween movies that are coming out. And that's because it's a gritty film. It's a film about a guy who won't disavow his faith. He gets sort of seized by the radical Muslims. The film goes from Washington, D.C. to Cairo, to Lebanon, to a prison in Iran. We shot the film in Jordan. So I'm trying to make the move from documentaries to feature films, because I know that's the gold standard of Hollywood. The reason it's hard to do on our side is for this reason, and that is, if you're Michael Moore or even Oliver Stone, you want to make a movie, you go to a studio. They go, here's $20 million. Go make the movie. And once you make the movie, you're booked on Monday on the Today Show, Tuesday on The View, Wednesday with Jimmy Fallon. So the path is laid out for you. And all you have to do as a creative person is make the movie. But if you're you or me, we've got to find investors or donors. We then need to do legal work to set this up. Then we need to get a production company and actually make the movie. And once we've done it, we've got to figure out how to market it to get the investors their money back. So this is a very diverse set of skills. And we have creative people on our side, but they don't have money. And then you have some people who have money, but they don't know how to make a movie. So putting this sort of mix of 5 or 6 different talents together. So we've been able to do it with a small team, but we just need to multiply, 20-fold.
Yeah, we have to also realize
10 movies a year.
And we have to realize there's so much room in this space that, like, not only can you thrive and I thrive, but there's room for us to capture the attention of at least half of America that is begging for alternatives. And so there is room for all of us to use our power together and to make this happen. So this is totally off topic, but I would love to have, people from Infidel on as well to help promote that movie, because I want to do everything we can to support these alternative lanes and different ecosystems. And we're going to look into that. And this tells you the power of social media right now. I hadn't even heard about Infidel yet. And I should have. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like, you and I,
it's a really good movie, and it stars Jim Caviezel, and it's a political thriller. And what we'll do, I'll connect you with Cyrus Nowrasteh, because he's a young Iranian American convert to Christianity, and a very skilled filmmaker, just the kind of guy we need on our side, but someone he needs to be a lot bigger than he is. And he made a sort of a niche movie several years ago called The Stoning of Soraya M., a movie with too prohibitive a title, if you ask me, because people are going to be a little reluctant to go to a theater to see a movie about someone getting stoned. So we went to him and said, hey, Cyrus, let's do a big political thriller. And he's done an amazing job. So yes, he would be a great guy. He has a very interesting story himself for you guys to have on. And but look into the movie. It's in theaters now. It'll be in video on demand before Christmas. And you'll see it's doing pretty impressive numbers in this weird COVID environment.
That's awesome. We would love to. So I don't want to steal too much more time. We're at our limit.
I have one more question
Okay,
for Dinesh. So I think you understand that the cultural fight so well, more so than most any other conservative influencer, in this movement. I'm curious to know what you think will happen after this election. And what we can do culturally, in our homes, in our society, with our neighbors. What needs to happen to wake people up to what's going on?
Well, let's just pursue. If we win the election, I think it's going to be a little bit like Reagan in 1984. We'll have the chance over 8 years of Trump to really make inroads. America was very different in 1988 than it was in 1980. And I lived through it. And I would say the Reagan Revolution lasted really till 2008 when Obama was elected. So it lasted 25 years. So there's a big upside here. If Trump loses, the left will try to establish a kind of hammer control over American politics and American culture. They will try to modify the rules to make it difficult for them to lose again. And this will, I think, put us in a very critical situation, because they are going to try to force us to live in their culture, by which I mean to pay obeisance to all their ideological priorities and to beat us up if we refuse. So the only question then is, are we going to do it? And if we're not going to do it, which I don't think we are, then what are our realistic options? How do we exit their culture and refuse to salute, quote, their flag, refuse to play by their rules? How do we give them the big collective middle finger? I think that's going to be a massive question for us. I have my own ideas about it, which may be a topic for another show. And I'm thinking of doing a book on this. But the bottom line of it is, I think we've got to start thinking it through, because that moment could not be all that far away.
You're absolutely right. And I warn people all the time that if the Democrats win the Senate, the House, and the White House, we're looking at a scenario that would create all of the ingredients for a national divorce, which would inevitably be violent at some point, you know, and it's sad to say that, but that's the reality that we're looking at. And I want people to be aware of it, because if you're not aware of it, then you're not ready, you're not protected, you're not, you know, planning for the economic sort of uncertainty that all can bring. But it's very real. If they make Puerto Rico a state, DC a state, they give illegal immigrants the right to vote, we're looking at a country where Republicans don't have a chance to win for decades and decades and decades. And when they do finally have that chance to win, it's going to be a very different party out of necessity to be able to win. So what we really look at is a national divorce that would become inevitable if they take that kind of leap, you know. So thank you so much for coming on with us today. Really appreciate it. And look forward to supporting everything that you and your family do.
Really appreciate it. If I can just remind people, it's just trumpcardthemovie.com. That's where you can find out how to get your DVD or your download, so you can watch the movie on any device.
Absolutely. And on YouTube, you'll have it in the description below. You'll have the link to the movie. So thank you so much, Dinesh.
Hey guys, it was really fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.